A single compliance rule, pushed from a distant server, can brick a $500,000 combine. That sounds extreme, but it already happened. The result is simple. A machine built to harvest food becomes a paperweight, and the same mechanism can hit legitimate farms, not just thieves. In spring 2022, Russian forces looted 27 John Deere machines from Agritech in Melitopol, Ukraine. The equipment was worth $5 million. The convoy moved more than 700 miles to a farm near Grozny, Chechnya. When operators tried to start the machines, none of them worked. Agritech technicians had tracked each unit in real time through GPS and telematics, then triggered a remote kill switch over the air. Many observers called it a wartime technology win, but it also revealed a larger risk to global agriculture. The unsettling proof is this: software control can overrule physical ownership. If a sanctions algorithm throws a flag, machine functionality can vanish instantly. The core conflict is no longer steel versus weather alone. It is code, law, and geopolitics versus harvest timing. Now zoom out to sanctions policy. Between 2000 and 2021, U.S. sanctions deployment expanded more than ninefold. What started as targeted pressure became broad macroeconomic coercion. That expansion set the legal stage for digital choke points. By 2025, Iran had overtaken Russia as the top sanctions target, accounting for nearly half of all new OFAC designations. In that same year, close to 1,000 people, entities, vessels, and aircraft were added to the SDN list. The velocity of enforcement changed the operating climate. June 2025 brought another escalation. The U.S. struck 3 Iranian nuclear facilities and imposed full blocking sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil. A coalition cut the Russian oil price cap from $60 to $47.60 per barrel and blacklisted more than 500 shadow fleet vessels. January 2026 pushed further. The administration captured and extradited Venezuelan President Maduro, designated 25 new foreign terrorist organizations, including Mexican drug cartels, and deployed secondary tariffs at scale. Secondary tariffs differ from secondary sanctions in scope. Secondary sanctions usually target specific firms. Secondary tariffs can hit entire countries that reject U.S. embargoes. Proposed duties range from 25% to 500%. Here is where agriculture gets trapped. Modern combines, sprayers, and planters are not just hardware anymore. They are networked computing nodes with software dependencies. Lose connectivity or authorization, and core functions stall. About 70% of planted U.S. acreage already uses GPS-driven technology. John Deere has partnered with SpaceX Starlink and installed ruggedized terminals on compatible machines. The goal is uninterrupted cloud access in rural areas. The side effect is deeper dependence on remote digital services. The physical tractor now answers to a digital service chain, and that chain is governed by legal frameworks first built for banks. OFAC starts with primary sanctions that bar U.S. persons from dealing with blocked parties. But primary sanctions were only the beginning. Washington added secondary sanctions to reach non-U.S. actors outside U.S. territory. The threat was exclusion from dollar clearing. OFAC argued that dollar payments routed through New York correspondent accounts export a financial service. That interpretation enabled aggressive enforcement. $1 billion under this regime. Commerce Bank paid $1.45 billion. Those penalties signaled that jurisdiction could travel through payment rails. Compliance risk became borderless. CSE Global, based in Singapore, paid $12 million for sales to an Iranian project. The equipment was non-U.S. origin. OFAC still said 6 U.S. financial institutions had exported unauthorized services because dollar wires moved through them. One payment pathway created full enforcement exposure. Then, regulators turned this machinery toward software itself. In mid-2024, OFAC and BIS jointly restricted IT consultancy and design services to persons in Russia. They also covered IT support and cloud SaaS, including ERP, supply chain tools, CAD, CAM, and product lifecycle platforms. For equipment makers, that creates a compliance paradox. Selling hardware to a non-sanctioned third country can be legal, but cloud maintenance for the same machine can become illegal after a border crossing. A lawful sale can mutate into a prohibited service event. 2 enforcement cases made the point unmistakable. SAP paid more than $2.1 million for 190 violations tied to exports into Iran. The pathway ran through resellers in Turkey, the UAE, Germany, and Malaysia. Roughly $3.9 million of software reached Iranian front companies. OFAC said SAP showed reckless disregard. Internal audits had flagged sanctions risk for 8 years. Yet the company had not implemented geolocation IP screening and skipped basic counterparty due diligence. Microsoft settled for nearly $3 million over 1,339 violations tied to blocked Russian entities in Crimea. In December 2025, a U.S. fintech firm paid $3.1 million, and its violation was customer support responses to users in Iran. Support itself became the sanctioned service. That precedent reaches farm operations directly. Over-the-air updates can trigger liability. Telematics troubleshooting can trigger liability. Even API support to a distributor can trigger liability once hardware enters a sanctioned jurisdiction. Next, the lockout mechanism inside the machine. OEMs use cryptographic serialization to pair parts through unique digital identities. Swapping a physical component is no longer enough. The replacement must be electronically authorized by the ECU through proprietary diagnostics. John Deere's Customer Service Advisor subscription costs independent operators over $3,100 per year. The interface kit adds $1,376. That puts access near $4,500 before the first repair begins. Software access is now a gate to mechanical function. During repair, the diagnostic tool pings OEM activation servers. The server checks license status and export compliance, then logs the event. If the account is flagged, the server rejects the session. The machine can drop into limp mode or full immobilization. Now measure economic impact. A 2023 U.S. PERG Education Fund study estimated software-restricted downtime costs U.S. agriculture over $3 billion annually. Service concentration is severe, with only one authorized dealership chain for every 12,018 farms. Delays are structural, not occasional. Authorized dealer mechanics charge about $58.90 more per hour than independent mechanics. Nationally, that spread adds roughly $1.2 billion in annual burden. Farmers pay both for slower access and pricier labor. The repair market itself compounds vulnerability. Then the biological clock starts punishing delay. Trials show combines beginning in late September outperform mid-October starts by 10 bushels per acre. Even slipping into early October can cost 6 bushels per acre. In revenue terms, about $27 to $45 per acre lost. For a 5,000-acre farm, a 2-week lockout during peak harvest can erase $135,000 to $225,000 in gross margin. That is one software outage window, not including downstream penalties or financing costs. Timing risk becomes solvency risk. Planting windows are just as unforgiving. Corn planted in mid-April captures nearly 100% yield potential. Delay until mid-June and potential drops to 80%. The implied 40-bushel shortfall at $4.50 per bushel equals a $180 per acre hit. Wet harvests add another hidden bill. Standard drying systems consume 0.02 gallons of propane per bushel for each moisture point removed. Harvesting at 27% instead of 15% means removing 12 points. At $1.65 per gallon across 200,000 bushels, extra fuel alone reaches about $80,000. Now follow the damage into finance. Lenders increasingly use smart tractor telemetry, drone feeds, and digitized harvest records for live credit scoring. If sanctions lockouts kill software access, telemetry streams go dark. The lender loses operational visibility on collateral. A $500,000 combine with a revoked software license stops being productive collateral. It becomes a depreciating liability. Prolonged immobilization can breach loan-to-value covenants. That can trigger technical default even before crop cash arrives. Insurance does not close this gap. Multi-peril crop insurance requires good farming practices. If crops remain unharvested during a lockout, carriers can argue those practices were not met. Coverage can fail when producers need it most. Business interruption coverage is also weak here. Most policies require direct physical loss or damage. An API denial creates functional paralysis without visible breakage. A physically intact machine can still produce a denied claim. The final barrier is contractual sanctions language. Under the Lloyd's Market Association 3100 clause, insurers cannot provide benefits that would create sanctions exposure. That clause appears across international commercial insurance contracts. If disruption traces to sanctions compliance, indemnity is legally blocked. In practice, compliance errors become farmer losses. The manufacturer protects its legal position. The bank protects covenants. The insurer protects sanctions exposure. The producer carries the residual shock. Meanwhile, compliance costs keep rising globally. Financial crime compliance spending in EMEA reached $85 billion in 2023. North America spends about $61 billion each year. Those costs pressure firms to automate and harden screening behavior. Routine screening is neither cheap nor fast. A single KYC review averages $2,598 per corporate customer. The process takes about 95 days. For seasonal agriculture, that timing lag can be fatal. Farms run on biological deadlines, not compliance calendars. Export control scope expanded again in September 2025. BIS introduced an affiliates rule covering foreign entities that are 50% or more owned by parties on the entity list or military end-user list. More than 20,000 Chinese entities can fall under this net. Many entities mask risk through Western financial hubs. Of 94 million European companies analyzed, 19.43% changed registered address between 2022 and 2025. Of 26 million African companies, 29.68% changed their fundamental business nature. Under periodic review cycles, these shifts can remain invisible for years. Now add fertilizer geopolitics. The Gulf supplies about 46% of global urea. Hormuz disruptions threaten 38% of global nitrate fertilizers and 20% of phosphate fertilizers. Natural gas can represent up to 80% of nitrogen fertilizer production cost. After escalation, granular urea jumped 50%, from $482.50 to $720 per metric ton. Input inflation then lands directly on planting decisions. Policy shocks become field-level cost shocks. Machinery manufacturers were already weakening. CNH Industrial reported a 23% revenue decline in 2024. In Q1 2025, revenue dropped another 21% to $3.83 billion. Equipment supply resilience was deteriorating before the next crisis. AGCO showed a similar pattern. Adjusted net sales fell to $11.66 billion from $14.4 billion. Lower sales constrain service networks and inventory buffers. That feeds back into downtime risk for producers. Corporate exits from Russia also carried massive financial consequences. Exit taxes generated 250 billion rubles for Russian authorities. BP took a $25.5 billion hit from leaving Rosneft. BlackRock wrote down $17 billion. Yet firms that stayed captured a wartime vacuum. In 2024, 2,326 companies that remained generated about $201 billion in revenue. Net profit reached $19.5 billion. Market share can shift quickly when rules change unevenly. If this still feels theoretical, consider May 2024. A severe geomagnetic solar storm disrupted GPS over the U.S. agricultural heartland during peak planting. Estimated farm losses were $3 to $12 per acre. A space weather event became an on-farm cost event. Design choices amplified that shock. Planters had become exponentially wider, and at the same time, manufacturers removed traditional physical row markers. When satellite guidance failed, machines were temporarily far less usable. Intentional interference is also real. Russian electronic warfare units have jammed GPS from Kaliningrad and the Kola Peninsula. The disruption affects about 40% of European air traffic and disturbs positioning data for satellites passing 1,200 miles above Earth. Cyber history tells the same story. In 2017, NotPetya destroyed 45,000 PCs and 4,000 servers at Maersk. Ports around the world were paralyzed. Digital contagion can lock physical trade. SAP's withdrawal from Russia reinforced another lesson. The company sorted users into exempt, option for exception, and blocked tiers. That classification model can cut enterprise systems overnight. Heavy industry then loses tools for factory control, supply chains, and payroll. So, what is the structural failure? Agriculture concentrated repair authorization and machine operability in centralized cloud servers. Those servers now sit inside automated sanctions workflows. A single compliance event can halt physical production. Financial institutions embraced digital integration to lower credit risk. Better telemetry looked like better lending intelligence. But many lenders have not priced digital dependency risk into collateral assumptions. Visibility is useful only while systems remain reachable. Insurance architecture adds a second fragility. Good farming practices tests can narrow crop claims during lockouts. Sanctions exclusions can nullify commercial recovery even without farmer misconduct. The risk is transferred downward by contract design. That leaves producers at the bottom carrying global policy shock. They cannot control sanction lists, war timing, or API policy. Yet they absorb immobilization, yield loss, and covenant pressure first. This is not a niche legal issue anymore. 3 interventions are now urgent. First, guarantee meaningful independent repair rights for critical equipment. Second, decouple core machine functions from continuous cloud authentication. Third, modernize agricultural insurance to recognize digital disruption as operational loss. Without those changes, control of software equals control of food production, and that control can be exercised by automated compliance logic far from the farm. The system remains exposed to errors, delays, and geopolitical spillovers. We built remarkable efficiency on top of brittle dependencies. The digital choke point is no longer hypothetical. It has been tested by war, sanctions, solar storms, and cyber attacks. If one line of compliance code can stop a harvest, then resilience starts with redesigning who controls the switch. Otherwise, the next outage will not just idle machines. It will rewrite food security in real time. The question is not whether digital agriculture is useful. It clearly is, and farms have already integrated it deeply. The question is, who controls continuity when legal triggers fire? Right now, continuity is often controlled far from the field. That governance distance is dangerous during short planting and harvest windows. A compliance event can behave like a localized natural disaster. The difference is speed. Code executes instantly, while appeals move slowly. By the time paperwork clears, biological windows can close. Producers are being asked to manage risks they cannot directly audit. They cannot inspect sanction screening logic inside third-party systems. They cannot validate every downstream software dependency in real time. Yet they remain fully exposed to the financial consequences. Lenders face a parallel blind spot. Their models assume digital streams remain available when stress arrives. But stress events are exactly when those streams can disappear. Collateral analytics can fail at the moment decisions are most urgent. Insurers face their own conflict between policy language and operational reality. Contracts were built for physical breakdown and weather loss, sit between those categories, and often fall through both. That legal gap converts operational disruption into uninsured loss. Manufacturers, meanwhile, are optimizing for legal certainty and platform control. From a compliance perspective, centralized shutdown capability can look prudent. From a food system perspective, the same capability creates concentration risk. The interests do not naturally align without policy design. None of this means abandoning sanctions enforcement. It means designing enforcement paths that do not accidentally disable lawful food production. Precision in compliance should match precision in agriculture. Broad digital denial is a blunt instrument inside a time-critical sector. A resilient architecture would separate safety-critical machine functions from always-on cloud permission checks. It would a controlled local operation when networks or compliance services fail. It would still keep audit trails for regulators and preserve accountability without forcing avoidable crop loss. Producers also need faster dispute resolution when false positives occur. A delayed correction can be as destructive as an actual prohibition. In seasonal systems, timing is itself an economic asset. Protecting timing should be treated as core infrastructure policy. The bigger lesson extends beyond one company or one country. Once physical production depends on remote software permission, sovereignty over output becomes fragmented. Agriculture then inherits every shock in cyber policy, sanctions policy, and cloud operations. That is the true digital choke point. Food security used to hinge on weather, soil, and fuel. Now it also hinges on who can authorize a machine to run. If that authority can be withdrawn with one compliance event, resilience demands structural redesign now. The harvest should be decided in the field, not in a distant server log.